host, Frances Reimers, with you as always. Thank you for tuning in this week. If you are living in the DC metro area, you're probably ecstatic this past week as we've actually, yesterday and today, had a temperature that was above freezing. So I actually was able to sit in my house without the heat on and without a knit cap on. So I am in an extra special happy mood today simply because I am of normal temperature. If you would like to join the conversation, you can always do so on Instagram at Let's Talk Personal or on Twitter at LTP Brand Radio. If you want to talk personally to me, and I know that you do, you can do so on Instagram at Firestarter CEO or on Twitter at Your Firestarter. A couple of fun little tidbits before we dive into our fabulous, wonderful guest and into other details of the show. First things first, starting next month, you can see my article on personal brand in You Can magazine. So Google that, follow them on Twitter, follow them on Instagram, but I will have a full article in the February edition that is all about personal brand. It covers a 101 and a 201 level for all of you that want to get out there and do more with your brand. You can do so looking at that edition that's coming out in February, You Can magazine. Also, if you were in the DC metro area or follow me on LinkedIn, you probably saw that last week I was on Great Day Washington talking about dating and your personal brand. Well, people thought that was pretty quacktastic because they have asked me to host some workshops. So you can go on Eventbrite and find the events. They're called Never Sleep Alone, Dating Profile Hacks for Guys. There will be an event on February 2nd at 7 o'clock in DC and February 9th at 7 p.m. down in Woodbridge. Another event is being put online for Fairfax, possibly Alexandria. Those of you up in the Silver Spring, Rockville, Moco area, if you want one in your neck of the woods, please have somebody from a venue contact me and we can certainly host one there. It's $25, guys. Come. It'll be fun. It'll be candid, and I'll help you build your dating profiles the right way. So hopefully 2018 is the year that you finally find love. I probably won't, but I'm more than happy to help you on your journey. But speaking of journeys, we've got a heck of a one for you today. With me today is probably hands down one of my favorite people in the whole world, and that is a very small number of people, and so he is in good company. With me today, one of the best, one of my favorite, Ben Man.
Thanks, Frances. It's good to be here.
Yay, I'm so happy. So, a lot of people don't know that, we are professionally linked, but people don't know that we are longtime friends and that we have a connection that actually extends outside of the DC metro area. So for those who don't know and did not cyberstalk Ben prior to watching the show today, Ben was raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so we have this kind of middle America connection, but also a Wyoming connection as well. Tell the Wyoming connection.
Yeah, isn't it rare? Two people in the Washington, D.C. area who spend extensive time in their lives in the state of Wyoming.
Yes.
Frances is technically a native of the land.
Fans of the show know. They know.
But I spent a significant number of years of my childhood in Casper, Wyoming.
Yes.
Which is the other major urban metropolis.
You're kind.
Of like 50,000
You're
people.
kind. You're so kind.
So yeah, that rural America connection is pretty strong.
Yes. So we definitely have our flyover states connection with one another, and a lot of people who are fans of the show know that I love musical theater. Ben also loves musical theater, so we have a deep love. I was hoping that we could maybe break out into Oklahoma, like the chorus from Oklahoma. Maybe later. Maybe later. I promise nothing. But you have an amazing career. I've always been a huge fan of your career trajectory because you've done some really great stuff over the years, been aligned with some pretty phenomenal nonprofits. Ben is kind of the nonprofit king. Tell everybody what you do and some of your cool stuff, especially from a job. Was it 2 jobs before with a lot of people? Tell people about what you've been up to because you do some pretty cool stuff.
Oh, thanks, Frances. Well, the feeling is definitely mutual, and I'm very grateful to be here in this wonderful studio. You have very attractive colleagues.
Yes.
Hopefully now they'll improve my sound quality.
What?
But I've had a very intense and wonderful career. I spent the lion's share, and how Francis and I met was while I was working in association and nonprofit work, and which led me to DC in the first place to do national and then international level work.
Right.
Where kind of the pinnacle of that work, I did work in the developing world around water and sanitation, primarily in the area of how it impacted young girls and women.
Right.
And got to work with some awesome partners, H&M Clothing being the best among them, or my most favorite, exciting, multi-million-dollar venture. And then about 4 years ago, I was attending the Gay Christian Network Conference, which is an organization very dear to my heart, and I will give them multiple shout-outs over this hour.
Yes.
And I felt a call to ministry. I'm a person of very deep faith. And so I am currently in seminary. I'm a presidential scholar at Central Baptist Theological Seminary. And ironically, that twisted my road, and I'm now working in the for-profit sector for the first time in my entire career.
I know.
And it's odd, but wonderful. And I now am proud to be part of the team at Cook Ross, which is a global boutique firm, and we focus on areas of diversity and inclusion. We consider ourselves to be in the transformation business, going into organizations, large and small, most who impact our world, and help their workplaces become more diverse, inclusive, and equitable through strategies and assessments. And we're kind of the vanguard standard when it comes to training around the issue of unconscious bias. So we help form communities, because we all spend so much time at work. It needs to be a healthy place for all of us to be, regardless of who we are.
And I think now more than ever before, I think diversity and inclusion kind of had a peak for a while, and then it disappeared off the radar. I think of a large part of Americans, but now it's very much, in my opinion, back online. Because of a lot of reasons, but it still has a very relevant and meaningful place. And talking about unconscious bias, I think now more than ever we're seeing a need for this. So talk a little bit about more like when you go into an organization or you partner with an organization and you're helping them with these particular issues. What is it that you're doing? Like, what are the hands-on tools?
Well, it's a full range of services that we provide. You're right to talk about how there's been ebbs and flows, and how organizations, especially companies, employers, have engaged this particular issue. And it is increasingly important for reasons in our culture, as well as just how we've been. When I think especially most sensitively right now about like the Me Too movement for women who've been sexually harassed or abused, especially in their workplaces. So our approach is really focused on outcomes, and it's really focused on a holistic cultural approach. So we are not looking, as in years past, over the last decade, a lot of the focus has been like on quotas and like trying to get the right people into the door. The problem is when you get the right people in the door, if your environment and your culture are toxic to them and to their experience, you've wasted your time. So we try to shift the mentality from do unto others as you would have them do unto you to do unto others as they need you to be. And which is a hard switch
for a lot of people to make.
But it's wonderful, and when you start to see it happen in very complex cultures, it's very rewarding.
And you put out there on social media for everyone to see the other day, so I feel like I can talk about it. You had a meeting with Lady Gaga's people. What was that all about?
Sure. I feel very a couple months ago, before the craziness of the holiday season, I was invited to partake in a forum co-funded or co-sponsored by the Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Odd bedfellows. Let's just be really honest.
I made a face when he said that. I was like, I don't think so.
So creative artists out there, influencing us all, and then essentially the business lobby. But that's also the beauty of diversity and inclusion, when you can find commonalities amongst difference. And they're working together on promoting and perpetuating kindness. So I felt very privileged to be a speaker, to be part of the day, and it's fostered this really interesting relationship now with the Born This Way Foundation, which is a great organization. You should totally check them out, because they want to promote this idea of kindness, which is so vague, right? Like we all know how to be kind, but like what is
some
kindness?
Of us more than others, but but sure.
So that's what we're working on, and we're in this very initial stage of like what's next, and how do we leverage celebrity? How do we leverage power? When we have power, like we can change the world.
Right. And we were talking a little bit offline before we started the show today, and you speak about kindness, and we'd been talking a lot about culture and how we engage with one another and how we're interacting with one another, and we'll hit it from the professional side before we digress into the personal side. But how are you viewing professional culture today as far as kindness and inclusion? Like, what would be your take on what's happening in culture from a professional stance right now?
Sure. I mean, we're just like we see being played out in media, played out. We all are aware of how isolated our cultures are becoming, and it's become the norm to ignore one another, and to ignore difference, and to be polite and try to skirt around areas where we don't agree.
Right.
But there's polite ways, or not. I wouldn't say polite. Let's throw that word out of the mix completely.
Yes.
There are kind ways to is more accurate, to engage one another and have courageous conversations around things that we just don't agree about.
Right.
And I mean, you and I, in our personal relationship and our professional relationship before it became a personal friendship, had areas of difference.
Yeah.
And politically, socially, spiritually, religiously, and yet, I think it's been our ability, both as professionals and which ultimately made us friends, to say like, I disagree with you, and Ben, when you badmouth Republicans, or when you or conservatives, sorry, we're not gonna put too many labels out there.
On this show, it's already out the window.
But conservatives, like, that has an impact. Like that has an impact. And so one of the funny things, Cook Ross, that I love, we're certainly not a utopia. We have our own issues. But we think often, we're called in, what a lot of people want to know, like how to deal with a Trump supporter in their office.
Oh, yeah.
And it's galling, that's a true thing. There are people, 43% of Americans agree with someone with whom, not to get too political, but like with whom I have serious differences about the brand, certainly, that he's putting out into the world. And it's like, it certainly counters a lot of the brand work that I'm doing in the world. And, but people respond to him, and people, want to believe what he believes. And so, how do I engage that? How do you, audience members, Francis, how do you engage that when you have very strong differences?
Correct. And I mean, I think that's a real thing. And to me, it's like, when you said, let's throw politeness out there, like, it's not even about being polite. To me, it's about having rational conversations. It's why do we have to say it's about, politeness, especially in business dialogue? Like, just be rational and normal. It's not even about being polite, because a politeness to me is that you're giving some sort of concession. Like, sometimes in business there is no concession to be had, but you can still have a conversation that is sane and rational. I somehow feel that in conversation we veered into some area that I don't even know what's going on.
Well, I think it's because we're operating from the portion of the brain that's just pure emotion. Yeah. And so all we know is our bias. All we know is, this is how this makes me feel right now. Right. I don't care what the facts are. Right. I'm just this is how I feel. So the moment I hear someone mention on a program like Donald Trump, like, I have a visceral reaction to that, and I already know how I feel about whatever that person is going to say, which is anger or disgust, or and I'm like, that's not true. So what you call rational, I would call fact-based. Like, what are the facts? Right. I know this is how I feel. I'm I've done a lot of inner work. I feel angry. Right. what am I going to do with that now that I understand what that is?
Right. Right.
And there's ways to do that professionally and to promote that in your culture, but it takes like a willingness to take risks, to think about other things than measurements.
Right.
Like, it takes a long time to embed this in a culture, but oftentimes our employers, not mine, but many, want to see a matrix, want to see a return on investment. But you have to look a lot more longer term.
Right, right. And I think, what I experience is the reason that people, get immediately, they're like, this is what I believe and I'm not going anywhere else. On both sides of the coin, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. I think for us to admit that maybe the other side is right makes us uncomfortable, because it makes us have to reevaluate our whole belief system, our whole process, and people are just like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to flatline this conversation right now. And I believe it's your boss who has a book, several, that tries to maybe encourage a dialogue on both sides of being like, well, why can't we both come to the table and talk about this? And I feel like we more than ever right now in this country need to be able to sit down and have dialogues on lots of issues. Mm-hmm. I mean, every day in the news there is something happening that one side is coming at it this way and this side, doesn't want it, or whatever the case may be. But we're not really actually talking about these issues. It's just policy.
Stance, position.
Right, and no dialogue in between. And is, the question I brought to a lobbyist friend of mine the other day is, I was like, are we going to have 4 years of, or more, maybe, of just policy, no dialogue. It's just talking head, and nothing in between. It's just yelling. Like, you mentioned H&M earlier in the conversation, and obviously they're in a little hot water recently because of a very bad choice of advertisement.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I saw an interesting exchange between two people who I didn't know on Instagram I think it was earlier today. And, somebody posted the picture and was like, who approved this, blah, blah, blah. And one person was like, I'm sure it was it's a severe lap in judgment. Like, there was no intent here. And the other person was like, there's no severe lapse in judgment of that magnitude. And let's talk about this, because any person, I'm not defending H&M in any sort of way, but I can say any person who has worked in PR or marketing, like that is your job, we've all been there. Like, when I saw this come out from H&M, did I cringe? Absolutely. Did I see what was going to come down the pike? Absolutely. But have I been there where we put something out for a client or whatever, and there was no malice? Mm-hmm. There was no, oh my God, we're going to do this because we believe. No, it was straight, oh my God, we think this is adorable and we should run with this. And that was it. But nobody is willing to have that dialogue in the middle. It's stance, policy, shut it down. And I see why people are angry, but I also see on the other side that this was just an egregious lapse of judgment. But we don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
We just want to keep fighting of why it was wrong.
Yeah.
And we just want to keep the other side. One side wants to be like, no, this was awful and terrible. Mm-hmm. And the other side is like, this was just a mistake. These things happen. But nobody wants to talk about it. We just want to keep like, nah.
Well, it's because to us, individually, our feelings are facts.
Right.
We want to believe that how we feel about something is what it is, because that's how we feel.
Yes.
Without seeing the bigger picture. I too think what H&M did was boneheaded and stupid, and but I also want to believe that there is well intention. I think that they wanted to put out a product that they liked.
Right.
And so you kind of have to go into it assuming that. Like, I assume that the intention here was positive and to sell children's clothing.
Right.
But the execution or the understanding of the culture in which you were selling it was just way off.
Tone deaf completely.
So we actually do. I have several clients, or my company has several clients that are ad agencies.
Right.
For this very reason, and helping advertisers, marketers, people to think about slowing down and really assessing like what you're seeing, because we all work in these fast-paced environments where we need to make decisions. Like, okay, here's copy, like what do we do? Let's go with that design. And I guarantee you that had they slowed down, H&M might have caught on, you know, and said, would this sell in an American environment, or what, you know, but it's happened all the time. It happened last year there was an issue with Gap. And the way that they positioned children in a Christmas ad.
The Dove thing where the African American woman like took off the shirt and it was a white woman. Like, I mean, this stuff happens all the time. Not condoning it, but it does happen.
And so what do we do? We need to have a healthy dialogue and say like, okay, when this happens, can we be at least forgiving enough to be thoughtful? But before it, to try to preemptive is not necessarily finding agreement. You said the word agreement earlier. And I don't think it's finding agreement so much as it's like being inclusive. Like, how can we bring in as many thoughts, you know, facts as possible from multiple different perspectives, and make decisions that way, as opposed to reacting.
I mean, a great example not too long ago, I think it was right here in this studio, this was several weeks ago, so we were talking about, you know, the Civil War monuments and them being taken down, and I was sharing that, you know, when this whole hoopla started, I'm like, yeah, take them down, and the person I was talking to was like, how can you say that? That's outrageous. Look, I mean, I grew up in Wyoming. What happened in the Civil War was nothing more than a couple of chapters in our social studies book. Like, I have no dog in the fight. Like, Wyoming is way outside of what considered the Mason-Dixon line. And so for me, I'm like, if it's causing people harm and hurt, take them down. And please, if people have emotional feelings that it's causing them pain, that they are there, take them down. Because to me, I'm like, I have no dog in this fight. And the person I was talking to was like, I mean, literally like getting up in my grill that, you know, I was anti-American and I'm like, what? And driving home that evening and thinking about the conversation, I was like, this is why people need to come to the table and have dialogue, because I don't have a dog in this fight. So to me, it's very easy for me to be like, yeah, take them down. Take them down.
I love it.
This person is offended. They're harmed. They feel hurt because this statue is erected. Take it down. Take it down. And replace it with something that does not cause pain and suffering to others. And so it was very easy for me to be like, yeah, go ahead, take it down. But this other person in the argument was like, no, they should not be taken down. That is a symbol of blah and blah and blah. And you are anti-American because you want to take them down. I was like, what? Like, you know, but all the more reason that people should have a dialogue around these things, because there are people that have no dog in the fight. There's people that have very much a dog in the fight on both sides. But we're all collectively as Americans making these decisions.
Sure.
And so the more that we can have open and honest dialogue around things of all kinds, I think better the outcome.
Sure.
My question about having these dialogues is, how realistic and where should they be fostered?
Well, it has to start from a values statement. Like, you know, whatever organization you're in. I also do this work, by the way, in the faith community. Is to find what are our values, and those are our values through and through. And what outcome around diversity and inclusion do we want to see that reflect our values? And anytime you have a question about what you're doing, is to look back on your values and to say, this is what we're doing. And then from there, it's about taking steps to reflect those values and culture. You start with leaders. You really like permeate your leadership, and you make them really invested in whatever it is that you're planning to do. And there, you know, that it's got to be multifaceted. There's got to be a lot of activity around it. Then you start to prepare your people. So once your leaders are speaking the language and they understand, you know, what some of the code words and some of like how to operate, you know, and what they're doing, some of their own inner work that might be contributing to someone else's exclusion. is to start training people,
Right.
and having them feel prepared. So preparing like the cohort and rising up leaders who
Right.
within this is such a great opportunity. Diversity and inclusion work is an amazing opportunity to promote people within an organization
Right.
and give them an opportunity to lead.
Right.
And then the next phase is to involve people. So you've prepared them. Now you're going to involve them in the solution.
Right.
And start to move forward from facts. A
Right.
lot of our work starts from assessment work, going into a culture, gathering the data that they already have at their
Right.
disposal, but maybe they're just not looking at,
Right.
because it doesn't necessarily impact their bottom line.
Right.
But ultimately, the opportunity cost is huge.
Right. Right. Switching gears slightly, so you are a pastor.
Sure.
This is your jam. What does a modern day pastor? What does that look like? What is that life like?
Well, that is switching gears. It's just a completely different world.
Right.
The church, the Protestant church,
Yes.
just turned 500 years old.
Okay.
As I joke with my Catholic friends, you've had 500 years, figure
Right.
it out. No, I'm kidding. But the irony of it all is that every 500 years, the Christian church at least goes through tremendous turmoil and upheaval and like becomes something completely different than what it was
Right.
previously. And I think that that's what's happening.
Okay.
The church is going through pains. There's so many issues. Talk about division.
Yeah.
There are issues that are clearly demarcating culture within
Right.
for Christians, which predominantly, most people identify as Christian in this country
Right.
at least, and it's leading to some outcomes. I mean, it had an impact on our presidential race.
Yes.
It has ramifications for employers, and when you think about like. There's like a lot of employers now that are weaving their faith into like their employee outcomes and benefits and Hobby Lobby.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. Like that's a problem when when your feelings and your beliefs just like start to become like the modus operandi, regardless of how they impact other people.
Right. Right.
So we're just in this time of revolution. Thank God. I wrote an article on Medium last month
Right.
called The Tainted Christian, which is about this issue about, facing the fact that for a lot of people, because I'm gay, I'm a minister, like I'm automatically out.
Right.
And in some ways, like I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being automatically, because I have this whole other culture that I can be part of.
Right.
But that's not the core of humanity.
Right.
It's not the core of Christianity. It's
Right.
not. It's about unity and about
Right.
coming together and experiencing freedom together.
Right.
So it's an imperative time. I don't know. There's a lot of question marks about
Right.
like what it's like to be a pastor today.
Yeah.
Because my friends who are working in churches are really struggling because they're trying to like uphold
Yes.
frameworks that don't work anymore.
Right.
So I'm actually in a personal exploration of what
Right.
that all means.
Right.
I've been approached about online churching, like starting a
Okay.
church that's online, targeted at specific audiences.
So would that be like a weekly sermon that people just like FaceTime live?
It could be this, yeah. It could be as simple as this, or something more interactive.
Right.
A lot of seminaries are becoming laboratories for this kind of
Right.
style.
Right.
It's about community.
Right.
Like, how do we foster a community of meaning for people where they feel like they can
Right.
come and they can find healing and they
Right.
can find meaning, and they can feed their souls.
Right.
We don't talk about our souls very much, which is
Right.
like the artistic part of our brain.
Well,
and-
people do on Instagram a lot. I'll tell you that. But go ahead.
but just about you and me. Like
Right.
we, in our daily lives, we need to find ways of feeding our souls, even if you don't call it a soul.
Right.
Like feeding that part of yourself that just needs to be expressed, that
Right.
needs like to make you feel whole, because we're not robots. Like we
Right.
can't always just like I said, we struggle with emotion and facts. Well, we're not robots, so we can't turn off the emotion.
Right.
Like that has to go somewhere, and I think that
Right.
there's great power when we face that.
I think feeding your soul is such a key thing. Actually, earlier today I was listening. I listen to the Tony Robbins podcast all the time, and on this one particular episode that I was listening to, there was a social scientist on there who was talking about his book, and his book was all about us kind of getting ourselves away from our phone, our addiction to our phones, which anyone who knows me knows I have a very deep addiction to my phone. But what he was saying was really resonating, and he was like, addiction is just like any other alcohol, tobacco, gambling, whatever. He's like, our addiction to our phones is the same thing. And, if you feel that you have an addiction, you need to, just like you would any other addiction, you need to, figure out why you're doing this and try to step away from it. And he talked about not in the same words, but the same meaning of feeding our souls. A good girlfriend of mine is all about, doing more of what makes you happy, which I think kind of feeds into to feeding your soul. And I think a lot of people genuinely, I think they don't say it, but I think a lot of people genuinely don't know what feeding your soul is.
Sure.
What that is. And I think a lot of people, I see it, I call it Instagram Christians of talking about, God will bring this to your table, and they project all of these sorts of things. And I sit there and I'm like, are you really as godly and whole as you like to project yourself to be? But I truly think that if you asked people, how do you fill your soul? How do you recharge your soul on a daily basis? I think a lot of people would not really know how to answer. They might be like, well, I yoga or I meditate or whatever. But there's got to be more out there than yoga and meditation to fill your soul. And over the holidays, I kind of was in this kind of taking stock of the year and thinking about, the hours of my day and what was filling up the hours of my day, and being like, okay, what can I outsource? I posted this on my Facebook page. I'm like, okay, I need to start offloading things in my life because there are only so many hours in the day, and it's not that I can't do all of these things, because I can, because I have been doing them, but I'm starting to burn out. And one thing as I was taking the daily inventory is, I literally, because I'm type A and anal retentive, I literally put this into a spreadsheet of every minute of my day, what I was doing. I literally was honest with myself and was like, okay, from this time to this time, you sat in front of the TV and watched Access Hollywood. This is what you did from this period, and then from this period to this period, you worked, and this period to this period, you sat on LinkedIn and looked up people. But I did this for an entire week, and at the end of the week, I really didn't see a whole lot of stuff that would qualify. Yes, it was downtime. Yes, it was probably me time, but nothing that I think would really qualify as soul filling. Something that I would say, yes, was my brain on autopilot for 30 minutes, an hour? Did I laugh? Did I find enjoyment? Sure. But did I really do something that filled my soul, that really spiritually, emotionally recharged me? And I'll throw myself under the bus and say that there wasn't a whole lot of boxes that had soul recharging activities in them. And so I think people need to do more of that. I included in that wheelhouse, but I don't think people know where to start.
I think honestly, I think a lot about learning about our souls has to happen in community, in partnership with other people who can help us find those things. That's why we do schoolwork in a classroom, because when we're young and we don't know ourselves, we need others to kind of bounce off of it. And I think we forget that as adults. Yeah. Which is why for me, having a faith community is so valuable. Right. One of the ways that I'm feeding my soul, even though it's inconvenient time of year, next week I attend an annual conference of the Gay Christian Network, which I mentioned earlier. Yep. It's a 4-day event. It's global. 1,500 queer Christians from around the world gather. 30,000 stream in from wherever they can be. And it is such a time of community, of fellowship, of doing our practice of church in a way that is so beyond anything else I've ever experienced, because everyone in that room, in those rooms, has felt rejection, misunderstood, labeled, and so it's a powerful way. And the funny thing is, within that room, there's such a broad diversity of people who do not agree with one another,
Yeah.
who would maybe never have found each other any other way.
Right.
And we're worshiping, we're taking workshops, we're engaging with each
Right.
other. It's a feeding of soul.
Right.
It's a way to discover ways to be healthier and happier.
Right.
And for me, to the broader community, to the external community, what it means for me is that I'm also advocating for this outside of the conference
Right.
and throughout the year. And so saying that this is how church should be. This is how faith community in general should
Right.
be. So all are welcome.
Right.
You know, be attracted to this, come into this
Right.
fold and see what it's about.
Right.
Instead of, again, all the isolation that we've been talking about.
Right.
You know, this, you know, for a while, the modus operandi of the organization was like, let's go out and prove ourselves
Yeah.
to these conservative institutions or these people who reject us regularly. And I'm like,
Right.
no, we don't need to do that. We can
Right.
abandon our need to control and to change others, and we can just say, this is who we are. Come be part of this.
Right.
And I think that's soul filling, is to
Right.
invite in. And so that's the soul filling part of being inclusive.
Right.
Of bringing in
Touche.
others. Yeah, it's like circling all the, you know,
And-
like this.
But also ministry in this day and age of social media and pastors wanting to engage with their congregation. What trends or what are people doing out there in a modern way besides this online sessions you were talking about?
Sure.
How are pastors trying to stay with the times and and engage, because you know pastors, their congregations are of all ages.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, millennials and Gen Z and whatever that generation is behind Gen Z, they are digitally native. And so to engage with them, I'm thinking that pastors are kind of having to get hip with being creative. How are they doing? You know, how have you seen that they're trying to engage with their flock, if you will, in electronic
Sure.
form?
Well, I think no surprise, there's a little catch up to do.
Right,
There's a lot of reflecting culture, you know,
Right.
10 years behind the fact. So there's a lot of pastors are, you know, getting into Twitter, just like anything else. It's
Right.
like, honestly, sometimes that's the only way to get out a message. So
Right.
having an active online presence,
Right.
you know, is the way to go. Blogging, a lot of bloggers. In fact, you know, one of my favorite bloggers is a woman named Rachel Held Evans, who's
Okay.
not a minister,
Right.
but who has a vast ministry
Okay.
in the Christian space because of her blog and how profound she is.
Okay.
And so it's really about finding areas of commentary, because I think that's our job. I think as ministers, our job is to challenge culture and to comment on it and,
Right.
and to help others process what's happening.
Right.
And sometimes, again, in non-polite ways.
Right.
You know,
I think
to say, like, this is wrong. What's
Right.
happening is honestly wrong. And God, or for those who don't believe in
Right.
God, you know, there's something, we have an accountability to one another as humans. Or,
Right.
you know, I honestly believe in God and believe that there's an accountability
right.
that we have, that, you know, part of being a creative person and a creative being in this world is that we need to connect with each other and foster this connectivity.
Right. I mean, you know, I've always been a huge believer of whatever faith you are. We're
Sure.
humans first, and you know, being kind to one another and treating with one another with respect is, you know, is paramount. We need to do that first and foremost. It's interesting to me because, you know, obviously I was raised Jewish and totally not really religious as an adult, but lately I have felt and you know, everyone knows I don't have kids and I will die alone with cats, but I have felt, I don't know if it's because there has been reports of a lot of anti-Semitism around the globe, but I'm feeling lately, I was actually just saying this to a rabbi friend of mine who always tells me to come to temple, and I'm like, no, thank you, it's Friday nights. Do some another time, and maybe I'll join you. But I was telling him, I was like, is anyone else saying to you that they're feeling, you know, extra Jewish special lately? Because I, like, you know, seeing what's going on in the world on a global scale, not particularly so much what's happening here in the United States, although there are reports of it here in the United States, but on a global scale, I've been feeling this need to reconnect with my Judaism, not because I'm in, you know, that I want to go to temple, but because I'm kind of feeling that there's this anti-Jewish sentiment that is growing, and as a Jew and from a family of Jews, I'm feeling this like have to protect the mothership for some reason. And it's unexplained. And I explained this to my rabbi friend. I was like, I can't tell you why, but I'm feeling very much this need to, like, circle the wagons, if you will, and protect us from whatever is out there. And he was like, this is not weird or unusual. He was like, it's not uncommon that if you're feeling threatened to want to circle the wagons and protect whatever it is, but and I was like, but is anyone else? I'm like, am I the only person reporting this to you? I don't want to be the only person. And he was like, no one's reported it, but like, now that you put it out there. But I couldn't really explain why I felt this need to protect and defend, but I do, and I think it's largely in part because of anti-Semitic sentiment that has been appearing around the globe. I'm like, and I think it has to do, a little bit with, I have a niece and nephew, and they are, they try to practice Judaism, but I think my mama bear instinct is like, I don't want any harm to come upon them because of their background, and partly because I don't want to be hurt. Like, I don't want anything happen to me. But it's all about people having. I think we need to have more dialogues about this openly. I'm sure I'm probably not the only non-practicing Jew who has maybe felt a little like, what's going on, and maybe I need to stay with my kind so that we're protected in numbers. We're not exactly the most aggressive, we Jews, so maybe we need to band together. All of us.
I don't support this commentary.
Like, all of us, sit together. But I don't know where that comes from, but I know that good dialogue would help get this out there more.
Or being vulnerable. What you're doing right now is very vulnerable.
Right.
And I appreciate that about you, Frances, that you're willing to share this.
Oh, I have no filter. You know this.
But I have an initial question.
Yes.
About your rabbi. Is he cute and single?
So here's the deal.
No, don't answer that for my mother's sake. But,
he is not. I would not. Well, first of all, he's not in my wheelhouse.
Okay.
So everybody knows that my wheelhouse is very tall, fat, and bald, usually. So he's not in my wheelhouse.
Got it.
So I didn't initially find him attractive when I first started talking to him, but the more we engaged with one another, I began to find him attractive simply because he is high verbal. So I always appreciate a high verbal. And he has a good sense of humor.
Yeah.
But it's not like frat humor.
Got it.
He is witty. It's very dry. And so you have to listen. He's literally making fun of you to you.
Sure.
And if you're not bright, you completely miss it. He's one of those people,
sure.
Which I love. There's nothing I love more than my old boss, Bob. He's the king of this. He can literally sit there and make fun of somebody to their face, and they don't. If they're not bright, they totally miss it. And I'm sorry, I'm mean, but it was always really fun to watch. But he had that level of humor, and so he became more attractive as we were talking, but still at the end of the day, I was like, no.
Got it.
No.
Well, but to the more serious point, I think what you're saying, first of all, I think it's more important that more of us are vulnerable, like really honest about how we're feeling, especially when we're feeling isolated. So again, kudos. And for anybody out there who's listening, like, you find a place. Find safe places where you can admit that. And that's really brave of you. And I really appreciate that. But I think ultimately what you're describing is a need to belong. Yeah. It's a very, you're going to see that word thrown around a lot. It's the title of, belonging is the title of my boss's new book. Yes. Coming out this spring. Yes. And it's about this thing that we all need to belong. We all want to belong. Most of us look for it at work and in family. Yes.
And online.
And online. Yeah. But is it real? Is it a real connection? Is it real?
Yes.
So.
I think, I mean, that's a very interesting topic. I live in the world of social media, and that's my job, and it's and whatnot. I don't think it's real. I don't think I tell people, and I say this all the time. I said it the other day when I was on the dating segment on Great Day Washington. Take if you find somebody and there's a connection, take it offline as quickly as possible, because I just I love social media. It has such great power and great ability to connect us, but it's also disconnecting us. And I just, people have definitely found love online and they've been able to make it work. But for some people, it doesn't come to full circle. And so I tell people all the time that you have to take it offline. When I see people on social media battling back and forth with one another, take it offline. Like, nothing is ever going to get solved of you sparring back and forth online. When I see it on Twitter, when I see it on Facebook, saw tons of it during the election, people just going at each other. Like, take this dialogue offline. One, because we're all annoyed by you and we don't want to see it. But two, you're really not solving anything, talking. But especially when it comes to romance, or friendship, like, take it offline as quickly as possible, because if there is no real chemistry there's no real chemistry. It is going to die on the vine. And so, but I tell people, I was off camera. I was talking to one of the hosts of the show, and she asked me point blank. She was like, how long do you think people should talk back and forth before they actually meet in person? Which was an email that I also got after the show. Somebody was like, how long should I talk to somebody? I'm like, look, I'm not your mom. I can't tell you how long you shouldn't or shouldn't talk to somebody. But my opinion is the soonest as possible. As soon as possible. One, because you want to see there's chemistry, but two, from a public relations standpoint, less of a paper trail is a good thing.
Sure.
Because some people are immature, and you just don't want things in writing. Like, especially if things are going south, from a public relations standpoint, you want to get things out of writing as quickly as humanly possible. So, if you're interested in the person, meet up for coffee, meet up for lunch, meet up for dinner, meet up for drinks, whatever. But take the conversation out of writing as quickly as possible. Because we see this all the time. People are doing revenge posts. People are sending, revenge porn. Like, if you send somebody a picture of yourself and it goes south, people are now turning around and, look at what happened to, what was the senator, that the woman posted a picture that it was a completely consensual relationship, but it went south, and she posted the picture to the press, and we're living, this is real. These are times that we're living in. And so I always tell people, get things out of traceable thing. And that's not, it's just self-protection.
Sure.
It's just self-protection. And, a gentleman suitor of mine found out the other day that if you text something to me, I don't get rid of it. Like, if you say something mean to me, I don't get rid of it. And if you show up 3 weeks later being like, hey, what's up? I'm going to be like, hey, remember when you said this? Here we go. Here it is. But that's the world that we live in. And I think that we need to be very smart about that. And if there's chemistry, take it offline so that you can find out if it's real or not, and then move on with your life. But sometimes people move on with their lives in a very unexplained way. And so many times on this show, you all know that I have talked about bizarre things that happen in social media and bizarre behavior that people exude. Ghosting. So I've talked about this on the show, but this incident, so there has been an incident, and we won't go into specifics, but this person took ghosting to a whole other level and just completely, blocked you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, as we're talking about brand, I think also, just to comment on
Yes.
what you were sharing, this has everything to do with who we are as
Yes.
people and our brand in the world. And these, you can't conceal these things about yourself if you're actively hurting people by the way that you're dating. And, so we've gone from very global to very personal.
Yes.
I write for an app called Only Lads. It's a dating app, and I do a lot of commentary.
Is that the name of the app?
That's the name of the app
Okay.
and the website.
Only Lads.
It's a UK-based site,
Okay.
but I talk a lot about this, about how do we bring morality and ethics into how we treat each other, especially in the dating world.
Yes.
And you're correct. I recently had an episode, literally 2 months ago, I wrote an article about ghosting and the fact that we should not do it, and I got ghosted.
Right.
And in a really hurtful way, in a way
Yes.
that just kind of boggled my mind.
Yes.
It was a very positive conversation. We were moving pretty rapidly into an in-person
Yes.
meeting, and everything was correct, as
Right.
far as it could look on paper.
Right.
And then all of a sudden he was gone, and any way to access him or
Denied.
communicate. And there's some indignity in that, and not
Yes.
closing the loop.
Yeah.
I think appropriately rejecting people is
Yes.
actually healthy.
Yes.
It's healthy for us. It's healthy for the people.
Yes.
It helps us. And it's funny how we keep coming full circle. Like, it's not even about being polite. It's about
Yes.
being kind.
Yes.
It's like, I don't want to offend. I don't want to be caught saying the wrong thing. Or,
Right.
I don't feel comfortable with you.
Right.
Awesome.
Right.
I know that I'm not for everyone.
Right. Believe me, I am well aware.
I mean, my mother might disagree, but honestly, I think we all understand that fundamentally, and there's some respect that was missing there.
Well, and somebody brought up an interesting point to me the other day. She was like, you would remove a toxic person from your life and not allow them access to you. Why is it any different than somebody that you were dating and it didn't work out? And I was like, I don't. To me, so bear with me here. Like, a toxic person to me is you've gone through the relationship cycle, and now you have determined that this person should not have a seat at your table, and you are now removing them from the table, because maybe sometimes a toxic person does not remove themselves.
Sure.
Sometimes toxic people will not show themselves the door, and you have to remove them. I don't think that's the same thing as you went on a date with somebody and or didn't go on a date with somebody and it just didn't work out. I don't think you need to chop somebody off. Like, I wrote an article about this last year that I will resurrect around Valentine's Day about the etiquette of what you do when love goes south. Like, you meet somebody online and it doesn't work out. I've always been a big believer that, well, this is probably very telling about my love life, but if the relationship does not go well romantically, there's no reason that we cannot do business together. So
as long as one's not that you're not flipping that.
So
romance isn't for the business.
And so this is very true about my life. Is I have gone on many dates that I'm like, yeah, I don't like you. But in my head, I'm not
Sure.
telling them this. In my head, I'm like, yeah, it's not working out. But we could do business together. and so I go through the proper and responsible steps of maintaining a relationship with them, but they are quickly migrated over to LinkedIn rather than being on like my Facebook page. But I think that's polite and fair.
Is it?
Yes.
I wonder what the community would have to say about that. No, I mean,
they probably feel the same way, they just didn't realize it.
I mean, our friendship started in a very
Yes.
business-like manner.
Yes.
Although it migrated rather quickly.
Yes.
But I honestly, I think it's just about being honest and just saying, like, hey,
Yeah.
we can develop something else here that's beautiful and mature and loving, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're heading towards the altar.
Right. Well, we have successfully blown through an hour as I thought that we would, and I knew that we would, but we're united and it feels so good. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this week, and thank all of you there on Facebook Live. We appreciate you as well. I am Frances Reimers. If you would like to tune in, and I love that you do, please do so on Twitter at LTP Brand Radio or on Instagram at Let's Talk Personal. And of course, you can always connect with me on Instagram at Firestarter CEO and on Twitter at Your Firestarter. I am Frances Reimers. Tune in next week, when I have also another dear friend, author, physician, and TV medical contributor, Shilpi, Miss Shilpi. You know her if you watch Fox 5. She's adorable. She's wonderful. I can't wait for her to talk about her book. Thank you to my sponsors, Co-Create and Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind. If you'd like to become a sponsor, please let me know. I will happily take your check. But until that time, I mean, you got it. Who pays the bills? Until that time, I am Frances Reimers, and I love you and appreciate you. Good night. And we're leaving.